Pain. A thick, syrupy pain that pulsed behind my eyes. It was a hammer, beating a slow, deliberate rhythm against the inside of my skull. One beat, pause, another beat. I groaned, and the sound was a dry rasp in a throat I didn't recognize as my own. My eyes cracked open, not all at once, but in sticky, reluctant increments. The world swam into view through a greasy film, a ceiling, a sick shade of yellowed white like old bone. Water stains bloomed in the corners like ghostly continents on a forgotten map. In the center, a ceiling fan turned, each rotation punctuated by a soft click. Tock. A lame and dying clock. It did nothing to stir the heavy, warm air that lay on me like a blanket. The smell hit me next. It was a cloying trinity of odors. Stale cigarette smoke, ground deep into the fabric of the room, a sharp chemical bite of cheap cleaner. And under it all, something else, something faint, vaguely sweet, and deeply wrong. I was on a bed. My body was a leaden weight, my limbs foreign attachments. The sheets were rough, scratchy against my skin, cool where they hadn't touched me, and unpleasantly warm where they had. I pushed myself up onto my elbows. The room tilted violently, a ship caught in a sudden swell. My stomach churned. The hammer in my head picked up its tempo. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the world to be still. When I opened them again, the room had settled, a cheap, brown and orange box of misery. My gaze fell upon the nightstand, a wallet, black leather scuffed at the corners. It sat there stark against the scarred wood surface. It was a gravitational point in the chaos of my mind. An answer, maybe the answer. I didn't think. I lunged. My arm swung off the bed, a clumsy, desperate motion. My fingers fumbled, knocking it against a ring-shaped stain on the wood before closing around the worn leather. I snatched it back to the bed, my breath coming in short, harsh pants. Cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears, a sound that almost drowned out the fan's metronomic click. I pried it open with trembling fingers. A few folded bills. A receipt from a gas station, faded and illegible, and a driver's license, tucked into the clear plastic sleeve. The face in the photo stared back at me. It was a man in his 30s, with tired eyes and a mouth set in a determined line. His hair was dark. His jaw was firm. It was my face. The man in the photo was a stranger. I lifted a hand, my fingers tracing the lines of my own face, the stubble on my chin, the shape of my nose, the brow bone. It was all there. It matched. But there was no flicker of recognition. Nothing. A complete and total void. I looked back at the license, at the name printed in stark, blocky letters. Cole Anders. The name echoed in the vast emptiness of my skull. It meant nothing. It was just a collection of sounds. Who is Cole Anders? What the hell is going on? My head was spinning with questions, each one a sharp shard of glass. I was Cole Anders, but I didn't know him. I didn't know this face, this name, this life. I was a ghost inhabiting a stranger's body. Reflexively, I patted down the pockets of the jeans I was wearing. They felt stiff, unfamiliar, empty. My gaze darted around the room, a frantic, desperate inventory. A cheap box, that's all it was. The bed, the nightstand, a bulky television set bolted to a stand across the room. A single door, its wood scarred near the knob, with a heavy brass chain lock dangling from its housing. Besides it, a window, its glass streaked with grime, the frame looking like it had been painted shut decades ago. There was no escape there. A shiver ran down my spine. Was this a prison? My back pressed against the flimsy headboard. My eyes scanned the room again, slower this time. hunting for a single clue, a single object that might trigger something, anything. The wallpaper was a faded floral pattern, peeling near the ceiling. The carpet was a tapestry of stains, dark circles, and long brownish smears that my mind refused to linger on. The air was so thick that breathing was difficult. I had to move. I had to do something. My legs swung over the side of the bed. They felt weak, disconnected. I stood up, and for a moment I thought I would fall. I placed a hand on the wall to steady myself. The wallpaper felt slick, slightly damp. My gaze drifted down to my hand. My fingernails were caked with dirt. Dark, almost black grit was wedged deep beneath each nail, and on the back of my hand, near the knuckles, was a faded dark stain, the color of rust, old blood. I stared at it, a cold dread coiling in my gut. I tried to rub it away with my thumb, but it was set deep into the skin. I didn't remember how it got there. I didn't remember anything. This is impossible. My gaze snapped back to the nightstand. I had missed something. Next to where the wallet had been, half hidden by a cheap lamp with a scorched shade, lay a napkin. A cheap, thin paper napkin, crumpled into a loose ball. It was stained with a dark ring, probably from a coffee cup, just trash. I was about to dismiss it, to turn away, but a flicker of black ink caught my eye. Without a moment's hesitation, I reached for it. My fingers were clumsy, but I managed to pick it up. I carefully smoothed it out on the dusty surface of the nightstand. My blood ran cold. It was a map, a crude, hand-drawn map, rendered in thick black ink. And it was a map of this room. I could see it all, laid out in shaky lines. A rectangle for the bed, a square for the television, a smaller rectangle for the bathroom door, which was tucked into the corner near the window. It was all there, a diagram of my cage, and there were marks, 3 of them. 3 X's drawn with vicious, angry strokes. One X was placed directly over the drawing of the television. Another X sat over the lumpy, uneven depiction of the key mattress I had just woken up on. The third X was inside the rectangle labeled bathroom. What is this? My throat was dry. Goosebumps prickled my arms. I looked from the crude map to the room itself, my eyes tracing the path between the real objects and their sinister representations. The TV, the bed, the bathroom. A map is for finding something, for navigating from one point to another. But a map of a single small room? That wasn't for navigation. That was a checklist, a set of instructions. What was I supposed to find? What had this other me, this Cole Anders, wanted me to see or to hide? The sweetness in the air seemed to grow stronger, a sickening perfume of decay. The fan clicked. The blood pounded in my ears. I stood frozen, the flimsy paper trembling in my hand, a key to a mystery I was terrified to solve. The silence in the room wasn't peaceful. It was a presence. It was heavy, a weight pressing in on me from all sides, amplifying the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then the silence was murdered. A sound, piercing and brutal, sliced through the air. It was a physical blow, a shock wave that made my every muscle clench. I flinched so hard my teeth clicked together. My head snapped toward the source. On the nightstand, the old black rotary phone was screaming. Its bell was a frantic metallic shriek, an alarm from a forgotten era, a sound that didn't belong in the world. It rang again and again, a relentless, hysterical summons in the dead heart of the room. It was screaming for me, for Cole Anders. The phone kept ringing. Each shriek was a nail being driven into my skull, a raw metallic sound that vibrated through the floorboards, up my legs, and settled deep in my teeth. It was an impossible noise for a room this dead. It didn't belong. It was an invasion. I stared at the thing on the nightstand, an ancient black device, a relic from another time, with its coiled cord and circular dial, a museum piece resurrected for the sole purpose of torturing me. The ringing continued, a frantic, desperate pulse, one shriek, a pause just long enough for me to take a single ragged breath, then another and another. My body was frozen, my muscles were locked tight, my back was pressed hard against the flimsy headboard. Every instinct screamed at me not to move, not to answer. Let it ring, let it scream itself to death. In a world with no rules and no memories, one fact felt certain. Nothing good was on the other end of that line. But it knew I was here. The thought hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a wrong number, a crank call. This was a summons. The sound was too personal, too insistent. It was drilling into the room, searching for me, for Cole Anders. Who could be calling? Who knew this name? Who knew I was in this forgotten room on this forgotten highway? The question spun in my head, a dizzying cyclone of fear. The ringing didn't stop. It was the only real thing in the room, a screaming beacon in a sea of dread. I couldn't stand it. It was like a physical pressure squeezing the air from my lungs. I had to make it stop. My hand moved. It was a jerky puppet-like motion disconnected from my will. It reached out, trembling in the thick, still air. My fingers brushed against the cool, heavy plastic of the receiver. The vibrations from the ringing bell traveled up my arm, a jarring electric shock. Goosebumps erupted across my skin. I swallowed, but my throat was dust. Without a moment's hesitation, I snatched the receiver from its cradle. The screaming stopped. The silence that crashed back in was 100 times worse. It was a deep, predatory void, a listening silence. I held the receiver to my ear, my knuckles white. The plastic was slick with my sweat. I could hear my own heart pounding, a frantic, heavy thud against my ribs. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. For a second, there was nothing, just the hiss of an open, empty line, a sound like the rushing of a distant, dead ocean. Maybe they hung up, maybe it was over. Then, a crackle, a faint pop, like dry twigs snapping, and a whisper slid into my ear. It was a sound stretched and warped, as if dragged through gravel and recorded on a dying tape machine. It was low, sibilant, and impossibly close. It felt like it was originating not from the phone, but from the dark space just behind my own thoughts. Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. A chill, colder and sharper than any I had ever known, shot down my spine. The fine hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stood on end. My breath hitched in my chest. I knew that lullaby. The memory wasn't there. No mother's face, no childhood room, but the tune was embedded in my bones. A primal, horrifying familiarity. My entire body shook uncontrollably. My voice was a dry rasp, a stranger's sound. Who is this? I managed to croak. A noise came through the line. It wasn't a laugh. It was the sound of grinding metal, of something rusted and broken being forced to move, a dry, scraping chuckle. Glad you're awake, Cole. The name, my name, spoken by this thing. It landed in my gut like a stone. The room seemed to shrink, the nicotine-stained walls pressing in. This is impossible. They knew my name before I did. They were waiting for me to wake up. Did you finish our game? The whisper continued, its pitch sliding up and down, a nauseating glissando of sound. What game? My mind was a blank slate, a wiped hard drive. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles aching. I don't know what you're talking about. The scraping chuckle came again, lower this time, more intimate. Oh, I think you do. You're the one who made the rules. You always did. My eyes darted around the room, a panicked search for an unseen observer. The grimy window, the bolted door, the peeling wallpaper. Was there a camera, a microphone? Was I on a stage? The television set sat squat and dark across the room. The sweet, rotting odor from before seemed to intensify, catching in the back of my throat. My gaze fell on the hand-drawn map still lying on the nightstand. The X's seemed to pulse in the dim light. A game, a map. What the hell is going on? What do you want? I demanded, my voice trembling with a rage born of sheer terror. Want? The voice was a serpent's hiss. I just want what was promised. Time's a wastin', Cole. You're running out of it. The pitch shifted again, dropping into a low, threatening growl. The stain is setting. The stain. My gaze snapped down to my hand, the rusty brown mark on my knuckles, the dark filth caked beneath my nails. I looked at the carpet, at the dark smeared patches that I had tried so hard not to see. Which stain? My stomach churned. I felt a wave of nausea so powerful that I had to brace myself against the nightstand. What are you talking about? What stain? I shouted into the receiver, but there was no answer. Just a soft click, and then the dead hiss of the line returned. It was gone. I stood there for a long moment, the receiver still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. The air was so thick that breathing was a deliberate act. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was filled with the echo of that voice. It was contaminated. The fan overhead continued its lame rhythmic turn. Click. Tock. The sound was a mockery. Anger, white-hot and blind, surged through me. It was a release, a violent reaction to the suffocating fear. With a guttural roar, I slammed the receiver down onto its cradle. Crack. The sound echoed in the small space. I looked down. The black plastic housing of the old phone had splintered under the force of the blow. A spider web of fractures radiated from where I had struck it. My hand was throbbing. I stared at the damage, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The violence of the act shocked me. It felt both alien and horribly natural. I stumbled back, away from the phone, away from the nightstand. My back hit the cool, damp wall. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor, my knees pulled up to my chest. I buried my face in my hands. A game. The stain is setting. Cole. The words circled in my head, a venomous mantra. Someone was playing with me. Someone had set this all up. The room, the amnesia, the phone call. This was a cage, and the zookeeper had just called to taunt the animal. But why? Who is behind all this? Who am I? I lifted my head, my eyes scanning the miserable box once more. Everything looked different now, tainted. The bulky television wasn't just furniture. It was a hiding place. The lumpy mattress wasn't just uncomfortable. It was a tomb. The bathroom door was a gateway to another secret. They were all pieces of the game. Our game. My gaze locked onto the nightstand, onto the cracked phone, and beside it, the map, the flimsy crumpled napkin, the instructions. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs still shaking. I walked step by step, my bare feet sinking into the cheap stained carpet. I moved cautiously, as if the floor itself might give way. I reached the nightstand and stared down at the crude drawing. The X over the bed, the X in the bathroom, the X behind the television. My eyes traced the shaky, inked lines. This wasn't a game I wanted to play. I wanted to tear this map into 1,000 pieces. I wanted to set it on fire. I wanted to smash that television, rip open that mattress, and kick down that bathroom door until I had destroyed every piece of this puzzle, to refuse to play. But the voice on the phone, It had sounded so certain. "I think you do." Was it possible? Had I done this to myself? Had I wiped my own memory and left this trail of breadcrumbs for what? To relive something? To find something? To hide something? My fingers trembled as I reached for the napkin again. I picked it up, my touch so light I was afraid it would disintegrate. I held it closer to my face, my eyes poring over every mark, every accidental smudge of ink. I was desperate for another clue, something that would make sense of the madness. And then I saw it. It was so small, so faint, I had completely missed it before. Scrawled in the same thick black ink, right next to the angry X that marked the space behind the television set. It wasn't a symbol, it was a word, a name, 4 letters, Lena. The name hit me with the force of a physical impact. It didn't bring back a face or a voice or a memory. It brought back a feeling, a cold, heavy dread that settled in the pit of my stomach. It was a name that belonged to the sweet, rotting smell in the air, a name that belonged to the silence after the phone clicked dead. Lena. I stared at the name, my blood running cold. The map wasn't just a checklist of locations, it was a story. And I had just read the name of the main character. The X wasn't a mark for treasure, it was a gravestone. Lena. The name was an echo in a vacuum. It reverberated in the hollow space where my memories were supposed to be. I didn't know it. I had never heard it, but my heart knew it. It hammered against my ribs, a frantic primal drumbeat of pure terror. My pulse throbbed in my temples. A thin film of cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I looked from the crumpled napkin in my hand to the television set. It wasn't just a piece of furniture anymore. It was a monument. A dark, silent monolith bolted to the peeling wallpaper, guarding its secret. The X on the map wasn't an arrow pointing to a location. It was a brand, a mark of desecration. The sweet chemical odor in the room, the one that lay under the stench of old cigarette smoke and bleach, seemed to intensify. It coiled in my nostrils. It was the smell of the name. Lena. I had to know. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move. My bare feet made no sound on the threadbare carpet. Step by step, I moved with a caution that felt instinctual, like a predator entering an unknown territory. The air was heavy, charged with a dreadful energy. I could see dust motes dancing in the slivers of neon light that bled through the grimy curtains. Each one was a tiny witness. I stopped beside the television, my body tensed. My own breathing was a loud, ragged sound in the stillness. I held my breath and listened. The low hum of the ceiling fan, the distant drone of a truck on the highway. Nothing else. I knelt down. The floor was grimy, cool against my knees. I shuffled into the tight space between the dresser and the wall. The back of the television was a web of thick black cables and vents, clogged with a decade of dust. The smell was stronger here, overpowering, bleach, a sharp, clean scent of cover-up, and beneath it, that other thing, the sweet, dark perfume of rot. My eyes scanned the shadows. The space was barely 2 inches wide. Wedged deep behind the metal mounting bracket, almost completely hidden from view, was something that didn't belong. It wasn't a lost remote. It wasn't a fallen piece of plaster. It was a shoe. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. The touch was cold, the material slick. I hooked my fingers around it and pulled. It came free with a soft scraping sound against the wall. I held it in my hand. It was a woman's high heel, delicate, the kind of thing worn for a night out. The crimson leather was scuffed and scarred, but that wasn't what made my breath catch in my throat. The heel was snapped clean off, a violent, jagged break. And the entire shoe, from the pointed toe to the broken strap, was caked in a thick layer of dark, dried mud. Not just dirt, mud. as if it had been dug up from wet earth. I stared at the object in my hand. It was a story in a single piece, a story of a party, a long walk in the dark, and terrible, brutal violence. This is impossible. This can't be real. My mind rejected it, fought against the simple, damning reality of the thing I was holding. What happened here? Who was wearing this? Lena. The name was a whisper in my skull. I felt a wave of nausea so powerful that I pressed my hand to my mouth. I scrambled backward, away from the television, my legs tangling beneath me. The shoe fell from my grasp. It hit the carpet with a dull, soft thud that was somehow louder than a gunshot. It lay there on its side, a fallen soldier, a piece of an unraveling nightmare. I retreated until my back pressed against the foot of the bed, my eyes locked on the shoe. My heart was a wild bird trapped in my chest, beating its wings against my ribs. I looked at my own hands, at the dark filth caked under my fingernails, at the rusty smear on my knuckles. I looked back at the muddy shoe. Was this my work? Is this the game the voice on the phone was talking about? A scavenger hunt of my own sins? The thought was a shard of ice in my gut. No, it couldn't be. Someone was framing me. This was a setup, a twisted joke. What the hell is going on? I closed my eyes, trying to force a memory, a face, a place, anything. But there was only the void, the black, buzzing emptiness of my own mind, and the echo of that distorted voice. The stain is setting. I was trapped. I was in the evidence room, and I was the main exhibit. As I sat there, frozen in a state of pure, adrenaline-fueled dread, a new sound began. It was faint. So faint that at first I thought it was a ringing in my ears, the auditory ghost of the phone's shriek. Skitter-scrape. A pause. Just long enough for my brain to process it. Skitter-scrape, scrape. It was a dry, rhythmic sound. It seemed to be coming from directly beneath the bed I was leaning against. My muscles went rigid. I held my breath and listened, straining to place the source. The sound was small, furtive. Rats. The word was a life raft of rationality in a sea of madness. It had to be rats. This motel was a decaying carcass on the side of the road. Of course there were rats, scrabbling in the walls, nesting under the floor. It was disgusting, but it was logical. It was an explanation that didn't involve ghosts or monsters. I let out a slow, shaky breath. Just rats. Skitter-scrape. The sound resumed the instant the air left my lungs. Its timing was perfect. Uncannily perfect. A chill, different from the one before, traced a cold path down my spine. The fear was no longer about the past, about what might have happened. This was a new fear, a fear of the present, of what was in the room with me right now. I held my breath again. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. Silence. The only sound was the frantic pounding of my own heart. I exhaled, a short, sharp puff of air. Skitter-scrape, scrape. It started again. Instantly, my entire body went cold. This was not a rat. Rats don't play games. Rats don't listen for a man's breathing. This was responsive. It was aware. It knew I was here. My eyes shot to the space under the bed. The cheap, faded bed skirt hung down to the floor, creating a curtain of impenetrable shadow. The scratching was coming from under there, from that dark, unknown space just inches from my back. I lurched to my feet, stumbling away from the bed as if the mattress were red hot. I backed away until I hit the opposite wall next to the door. My eyes darted between the sinister crimson shoe lying by the television and the dark void under the bed. The room, which had felt like a small, claustrophobic box, now felt like a vast, dangerous arena. I was not alone. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, to smash the window, to kick down the door and flee into the night, into the relative safety of the screaming sirens and indifferent headlights of the highway. But the door was bolted. The window was probably screwed shut. And the voice on the phone, it felt like it would follow me wherever I went. What do I do? What is this all about? My gaze fell upon the nightstand. The cracked phone, the crumpled napkin, the map. It was the only thing I had. The only script in this madness. A set of rules to a game I didn't understand, written by a man I didn't know. Myself. Maybe the answers weren't outside this room. Maybe they were all in here, waiting to be unearthed, one horror at a time. Maybe the only way out was through. With a deep, shuddering breath, I pushed myself off the wall. I walked back to the nightstand, my movements jerky, robotic. My eyes stayed fixed on the threatening space under the bed, half expecting a hand or a claw to shoot out from beneath the fabric. The scratching continued its maddening rhythm. Skitter-scrape, skitter-scrape-scrape. It was the room's new, terrifying heartbeat. I snatched the napkin. My hand was shaking so badly that the thin paper rattled. I forced myself to look at it, to focus on the insane scrawls. The television was done. Lena, the shoe, the scratching. What was next? My finger, smudged with dirt, traced the ink line from the TV. It led across the small, hand-drawn diagram of the room. It led to another X. This one was marked over the drawing of the bathroom, over the small, messy rectangle that represented the toilet. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through me. My mind flashed to the stories you hear. Things flushed, things hidden, evidence disposed of in the one place designed to carry things away. The sweet, rotten smell seemed stronger when I thought of it. Was it coming from the pipes? From the drain? I stared at the X, my stomach turning. I didn't want to go in there. I didn't want to look. Then, my eye caught something else. A detail I had overlooked in my initial panic. Another small drawing, right next to the X in the bathroom. It wasn't a word this time. It wasn't a name. It was a picture. A crude, angry sketch drawn with the same thick black ink, jagged lines, a short triangular point on one end, a small rectangle on the other. It was a drawing of a knife. My blood ran cold. The map wasn't just telling me where to look. It was telling me what I would find, or what I had used. The shoe was violence. The scratching was a mystery. But this was a weapon, a confirmation. The game had just escalated. I was standing in a room with evidence of a violent assault, a living thing scratching under the bed, and a map that was now leading me to a knife. I looked from the map to the closed bathroom door and back again. The scratching sound seemed to get louder, more insistent, as if it were urging me on. Skitter-scrape, skitter-scrape, skitter-scrape. It wanted me to keep playing. The scratching continued, a maddening, dry rhythm that wormed its way past my ears and took root deep in my skull. Skitter-scrape, pause, skitter-scrape-scrape. It was the sound of a secret trying to get out. It was a pulse for the dread that had taken the place of my blood. I tried to block it out, to focus on the insane scroll on the napkin, but the sound was a hook, and I was the bait. My back was to the bed, but I could feel the bar. Noise, a vibration in the floorboards that traveled up my spine. I ignored it. I had to. The only path I could see was the one this madman, this other version of me, had laid out in smudged black ink. The map. A guide through my own personal hell. My eyes were locked on the second X, the one drawn over the crude rectangle representing the bathroom. And next to it, the angry sketch of the blade. A promise. A threat. What the hell is going on? The question was a useless echo in the cavern of my mind. There were no answers, only the next step on the path. Fear was a physical thing, a cold weight in my stomach, but the need to know was heavier. It was an anchor, pulling me down into the dark. I pushed myself away from the nightstand. My bare feet sank into the stained carpet. Each step toward the closed bathroom door felt like a mile. My hand, trembling, reached for the brass knob. It was cold and slick, coated in the room's grimy humidity. The door opened with a low groan of protest from its hinges, a sound that seemed to join the chorus of the room's decay. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Bleach. So strong it was a physical blow, burning my nostrils and making my eyes water. It was a desperate chemical scream, trying to shout down another scent that lurked beneath it. The same sweet, cloying perfume of rot I'd smelled by the television, but concentrated here, thicker, clinging to the damp air. The room was a coffin stood on its end. The linoleum floor, a disgusting yellow and brown pattern, was peeling up at the corners, revealing a dark, crumbly subfloor. A single naked bulb in a corroded fixture above the sink cast a harsh, buzzing light, making everything look sallow and diseased. My shadow loomed on the wall behind me, a tall, distorted figure that wasn't to be trusted. My gaze fell on the toilet. It was old. The porcelain was covered in a network of fine cracks, like a web spun across its surface. It wasn't just a piece of plumbing. It was the landmark on the map, the site of another sin. The drawing of the knife burned in my mind's eye. This is impossible. This can't be what I did. I approached it slowly, my muscles tense. The scratching from the other room was fainter here, muffled by the closed door, but I could still feel it. A ghost sound. A steady, insistent metronome counting down to something terrible. I stared at the toilet tank. It was the only place to hide something. The only place the map could be pointing. I placed my hands on the cool, heavy porcelain of the lid. It was solid, heavier than it looked. My knuckles were still sore, the skin scraped raw. I took a deep, shuddering breath of bleach-laced air and lifted. It came up with a grunt of effort from me and a sloshing sound from within. The water inside the cistern was dark, almost black, and smelled sharply of toilet bowl cleaner and something else, something foul, floating in the center of that dark water, bobbing gently with the small waves my movement had created, was a plastic bag, a Ziploc bag, sealed tight. My heart hammered against my ribs. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, a frantic drumbeat that nearly drowned out the buzz of the light bulb. It was there. It was real, just like the shoe. Another piece of the puzzle, another nail in my coffin. There was no thought, no debate. My actions were no longer my own. They belonged to the man who drew the map. Without a moment's hesitation, I plunged my right hand into the cistern. The water was icy cold. A jolt shot up my arm. It felt foul, unnaturally slick, and my fingers recoiled for a split second before my resolve hardened. I grasped the plastic bag. I snatched it from the water and held it up, dripping dark, chemical-smelling liquid onto the peeling linoleum. I stumbled back to the sink, my hand shaking violently. I laid the bag on the grimy countertop and tore at the plastic seal with my wet, numb fingers. It ripped open. I turned it over. The contents slid out onto the stained porcelain with a wet slap. I stared. My breath caught in my throat. The first thing was a lock of hair, a thick, heavy lock of it, tied at one end with a simple black rubber band. It was blonde, the color of spun gold, even damp and matted. It was soft. It was human. It was an intimate trophy taken from a life I couldn't remember. Lena. The name was a scream in my head, and next to it, nestled in the damp strands, was the knife. A simple pocket knife. Old. The kind a boy might carry. The wooden handle was dark and worn smooth with use. The small brass hinge was green with verdigris. And the blade was half open, and it was dark, caked with a thick, flaking layer of dark reddish brown. It could have been rust. It could have been dried mud. But I knew it wasn't. A wave of nausea rose from my gut, hot and acidic. I felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing my throat. I lurched forward, my body convulsing. I retched into the sink, a violent, helpless heave that brought up nothing but bile. The acrid taste filled my mouth. I braced myself on the edge of the sink, my knuckles white, gasping for air that still felt too thick to breathe. I had been holding this. I had been holding a piece of a woman's hair and the knife that was probably used on her. The filth wasn't just under my nails anymore. It was inside me. It was me. My head spun with questions. Who was she? What did I do? Why would I leave this trail for myself? Was it a game, a ritual, a desperate attempt to remember, or a sick way to forget? I needed to get clean. The thought was a primal urge. I twisted the faucet handle, the one marked C. A sputtering stream of rusty water burst out before running cold and clear. I shoved my hands under the stream, scrubbing furiously. I grabbed the slimy, half-used bar of soap from the dish and worked it into a desperate lather, scraping at my skin, under my nails, over my knuckles, trying to wash away the feel of the cistern, the feel of the knife, the feel of the crime. The cold water did nothing to stop the shaking. When I couldn't scrub anymore, I let my hands fall, dripping into the basin. I raised my head and looked up. My eyes met my own reflection in the tarnished, water-spotted mirror. The face that stared back was a stranger's, gaunt, pale as bone. The eyes were wide with a raw, animal terror. Dark circles were bruised beneath them. This was the face of a man being hunted, the face of a victim. I stared into those terrified eyes, searching for a flicker of recognition, for a hint of the man I was before this room. And then it happened. It was a flicker, a twitch, so fast I almost missed it, so fast that my conscious mind screamed that it was a trick of the light, a product of my frayed nerves. The mouth of the man in the mirror, the terrified reflection of my own face, pulled back at one corner, just for a fraction of a second. It wasn't a smile, it was a smirk, a sly, knowing, contemptuous smirk. His eyes, my eyes, glinted with a cold amusement that was utterly alien. It was the expression of a predator, not the prey. My blood turned to ice. A shiver ran down my spine, so violent it felt like an electric shock. My own facial muscles hadn't moved. I was frozen in terror, my jaw slack, but he had moved. The other me. The man on the other side of the glass. He knew, he remembered everything, and he was enjoying this. "No," I whispered, the sound a dry crackle in my throat. The reflection's expression snapped back to one of pure fear, perfectly mirroring my own. But the after-image was burned onto my retinas. The ghost of that hateful smirk lingered. He was in there. The man who drew the map. The man who used the knife. The whisperer's accomplice. He was trapped in the mirror, and he was laughing at me. It was too much. The shoe, the scratching, the bag, the knife, and now this. This violation of my own face. A breaking point I didn't know I had. A wave of pure, hot rage surged through me, eclipsing the fear. It was a blind, animal instinct to destroy the thing that was mocking me. To smash that lying face into 1,000 pieces. With a guttural roar that tore from my throat, I swung my fist. My knuckles connected with the mirror. The sound was an explosive crack that echoed in the tiny room. The glass didn't just break, it spiderwebbed and then imploded. Shards rained down into the sink, glittering like diamonds as they fell. A large piece clattered onto the floor. The face in the mirror was gone, obliterated, replaced by a jagged hole showing the bare, water-stained drywall behind it. Sharp, bright pain lanced up my arm. I looked down. My knuckles were split open, bleeding freely. Bright red blood dripped from my hand, mixing with the water and the soap suds in the basin, swirling over the lock of blonde hair and the waiting knife. The stain is setting. The pain was good. The pain was real. It was a confirmation that I was here, in this body, and not just a spectator to a nightmare. I looked at the blood on my hand, the same hand that had plunged into the cistern. It was my blood, my pain. I stumbled backward, out of the bathroom, leaving the wreckage behind. My bleeding fist hung uselessly at my side. My breath came in ragged, painful gulps. My back hit the cool wood of the closed door, and I slid down until I was sitting on the floor. My eyes scanned the motel room, now illuminated by the slivers of neon and the harsh light spilling from the shattered bathroom. That's when I noticed the change, the silence. The scratching had stopped. The instant the mirror had shattered, the sound from under the bed had ceased. The room was deathly still. The only sounds were my own ragged breathing and the steady drip, drip, drip of blood from my hand onto the carpet. I held my breath and listened. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant. It was worse than the sound had been. The scratching had been a presence. This was a void, a predator holding its breath, waiting. What did I do? Did I scare it away, or did I answer it? As if in response to my thought, the sound began again, but it was different. It wasn't the furtive skitter-scrape anymore. Thump, a single solid sound, as if something heavy had just been dropped. Then a new noise. A deep, long scrape. The sound of wood dragging against wood. It was coming from under the bed. It was louder now, bolder. Thump, thump, more insistent. It wasn't the sound of rats anymore. It wasn't the sound of something trapped. It was the sound of something working, something trying to get out. My shattering of the mirror had been a signal, a password. I had done my part. Now it was doing its. The game had escalated again, and the next player was making its move. My knuckles were on fire. A deep throb pulsed from the split skin, a rhythm that matched the frantic pounding in my chest. I stared at the blood, bright and alive, dripping from my fist onto the filthy carpet. Drip, drip, drip. It was the only sound in the sudden pressing stillness. Each drop was a confirmation. I was here. This pain was mine. The man in the mirror was gone, shattered into 100 glittering lies, but I remained. The silence that followed the explosion of glass was worse than any noise. It was a listening silence, a waiting one. My back was pressed hard against the door, the cheap wood cool against my sweat-soaked shirt. My eyes, wide and darting, scanned the room. The garish neon from the Starlight sign pulsed through the grimy window, casting long, moving shadows that writhed like living things. The light from the bathroom spilled out in a jagged, violent shape, illuminating dust motes dancing in the dead air. Everything was holding its breath, waiting for me. Then the floor vibrated. Thump. It wasn't a scuttling sound. It was solid, heavy. A single, dull impact that I felt in the soles of my feet and the base of my spine. I froze, my own breathing trapped in my throat. I listened, my entire being reduced to a single strained nerve. A long, low scrap followed. The sound of a heavy burden being dragged. The sound of wood grating against wood, slow and deliberate. It came from directly under the bed. It was no longer the sound of a small, desperate thing clawing to get out. This was different. This was the sound of something working. Methodical, purposeful. Thump, thump. 2 more impacts, harder this time, more insistent. A chill, colder than the cistern water, traced a path down my spine. The creature under the bed had been waiting for a signal. My rage, My violence against the mirror, that had been the signal. I had unlocked the next phase of this nightmare. I had given it permission. My gaze was drawn, as if by a physical force, to the crumpled napkin on the nightstand. The map, my only guide through this madness. My eyes found the next mark, the third X. It was sketched right in the center of the crude rectangle that represented the bed. My legs felt weak, my muscles trembling with a terror so profound it was almost paralyzing. But the need to know was a fire in my gut. What the hell is going on? The question was a useless mantra, a child's prayer in the dark. There were no answers, only the next step on a path I didn't choose but was forced to walk. I pushed myself off the door. My bare feet made a soft, wet sound as I stepped in my own blood. I moved toward the bed. Each step was a battle. The air grew thick, heavy with the smell of old sweat, dust, and that sweet, stomach-turning odor of decay. The dragging sound from beneath the bed stopped as I drew closer. It knew I was there. It was listening. I reached the side of the bed. The mattress was thin, covered in a cheap brown and orange patterned fabric riddled with cigarette burns and dark, ambiguous stains. It looked like it had borne witness to 1,000 sad, lonely nights. And one monstrous one. My good hand, the one that wasn't bleeding, hovered over the surface. It was shaking so badly, I had to clench it into a fist to stop it. I took a breath, the air burning my lungs. I put my hand on the mattress, and I felt it, right in the middle. Beneath the thin, lumpy fabric there was a lump that didn't belong. It wasn't the soft give of old springs or compacted stuffing. It was hard, angular, unyielding. I pressed down, the nausea rising in my throat again. My fingers traced its outline. It felt lumpy, roughly the size of a shoebox, but uneven, solid. This is impossible. My mind screamed the words, but my body kept moving, an automaton following a set of horrific instructions. I needed a tool. My eyes flickered back towards the bathroom, toward the wreckage of the mirror and the grisly tableau in the sink. The knife. I walked back into the bathroom, the crunch of broken glass under my feet a jarring counterpoint to the silence. The lock of blonde hair lay in the basin, a slash of gold against the white porcelain, now dappled with my own red blood. And beside it, the knife. Its dark, stained blade seemed to glint at me in the harsh light of the naked bulb. It was an artifact of the crime, and now it was my key. Without a moment's hesitation, my body acting on an impulse I didn't understand, I reached in with my bloody hand and picked it up. Its wooden handle was slick with the foul water and my blood. It felt strangely familiar in my grasp. I walked back to the bed, the knife held out in front of me like a talisman. I knelt. The carpet was rough and sticky against my knees. I used the point of the blade to pierce the coarse fabric of the mattress. It gave way with a small tearing sound. Once the hole was made, I began to saw at the stitching. The rusty blade was dull, but my desperation gave it an edge. The thick threads snapped one by one. Rip, rip, rip. The sounds were small and violent in the oppressive stillness of the room. When the opening was large enough, I dropped the knife. I dug my fingers into the hole, past the fabric, and into the guts of the mattress. Handfuls of yellow, greasy-feeling foam padding came out. It smelled like decay and ammonia. I flung it aside, my movements frantic, tearing at the mattress like a crazed animal digging for a bone. Then my fingers closed around something coarse. Fabric, stiff and bunched together. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought they would break. I gripped the fabric and pulled. It resisted for a second, then came free with a soft tearing of foam. I scrambled backward on my knees, dragging it out into the light. It was a t-shirt, a small t-shirt, a child's. On the front was the faded, peeling image of a cartoon rabbit with a goofy smile. It was the kind of shirt a little boy would wear. It was balled up tightly, almost rock hard, stiffened by whatever had soaked it. My breath hitched. My whole body was shaking uncontrollably. I placed the small, hard bundle on the floor. With trembling fingers, I began to unroll it. The fabric was rough, and as it unfurled, a wave of odor washed over me, so potent and foul it was a physical force. It was the sweet, cloying smell of rot I had been sensing all night, but magnified 100 times. The smell of old meat and damp earth. I unrolled it completely. The front of the shirt around the smiling rabbit was covered in a vast dark stain, almost black but with hints of a deep rusted red at the edges. It had soaked through completely, making the fabric brittle. It wasn't mud. A violent, unstoppable convulsion seized me. I lurched to the side, away from the shirt, and vomited onto the carpet, a wretched, acidic heave that brought up nothing but the bile burning in my throat. I was on all fours, gasping, drool and tears mixing, the world spinning in a nauseating blur. What kind of monster am I? The thought was no longer a question. It was a statement. A fact cemented by the small stained t-shirt lying on the floor. Lena. Was this her child? What did I do? Why? The questions were a storm in my head, tearing me apart from the inside. This was a ritual of remembering, but every memory I unearthed was a new blade in my soul. I was the architect of my own descent into hell. I pushed myself up, my body screaming in protest. I needed to get away from it, from the shirt. I stumbled towards the small counter and sink set into the wall near the door, a pathetic excuse for a kitchenette. I had to wash my hands. I had to wash my face. I needed something clean, something real. I twisted the tap. Cold, rust-colored water sputtered out. I shoved my hands under it, scrubbing my bleeding knuckles alongside my clean ones, trying to wash away the grime, the blood, the feeling of the knife, the foulness of the mattress stuffing. The cold water was a shock, but it did little to clear my head. My frantic eyes scanned the small space, looking for a paper towel, a cloth, anything. My gaze dropped to the cabinet under the sink, its door slightly ajar. I crouched down, pulling the door open, my hands dripping onto the floor. And I saw it. It was pushed to the very back of the dark, musty space, hiding behind a rusty U-bend pipe. It was black and rectangular. Plastic. I knew what it was instantly. A Polaroid camera. An old one, the boxy kind from decades ago. My breath caught. It didn't belong here. It was another piece that didn't fit, yet fit perfectly into the night's insane logic. It was another station on this grim pilgrimage. My hand, dripping and raw, reached into the darkness. My fingers brushed against its cool plastic shell. It felt heavy, solid. I drew it out into the dim light of the room. It was dusty, but otherwise seemed intact. As I held it, I saw something else. Taped to its side with a piece of yellowing adhesive was a small, folded piece of paper. The same kind of paper as the motel napkin. The map. My fingers, clumsy with dread, fumbled with the tape. I peeled the paper off. I unfolded it. 2 words were scrawled across the paper in the same frantic, spiky black ink. A command. An invitation. The next step in the game. Use me. The scratching stopped. The world went still. A stillness so total, so absolute. It was louder than any sound had been. It was an active, listening void. A vacuum waiting to be filled. The air felt heavy, pressing in on me from all sides, thick with the metallic scent of my own blood and the deeper, sweeter stench of rot from the child's t-shirt on the floor. I held the Polaroid camera. It felt alien in my grasp, a solid block of black plastic against my trembling, blood-smeared fingers. It was heavy. It felt like a stone. It felt like a weapon. My eyes were fixed on the two words scrawled on the folded paper I'd torn from its side. Use me. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. The next step in this sickening game. My heart was pounding, a frantic, desperate drumbeat against my ribs. I could feel the pulse in my throat, in my temples. Who was I taking orders from? Myself? Some other maniac? Who was behind all this? The questions swirled in my head, a dizzying storm of black confusion, but they offered no shelter. There was only the camera and the command. My whole body was shaking uncontrollably, a fine, violent tremor that started in my hands and radiated through my entire frame. I needed to move. I needed to do something. The silence was a physical pressure, threatening to crush me. My feet were rooted to the spot. My gaze flickered from the camera to the room before me. The scene was a nightmare tableau. The wreckage of the bathroom mirror glittering like fallen stars, the obscene little t-shirt lying like a funeral shroud on the stained carpet, the single broken-heeled shoe by the bed, the lumpy, violated mattress. This was the stage. And I was the only actor left. Reflexively, I raised the camera. The motion felt wooden, disconnected, as if my arm was being pulled by strings. The viewfinder was a small, dusty square. I put it to my eye. The world shrank to a tiny, framed slice of horror. It made the scene look distant, unreal, a picture someone else had staged. I aimed it at the heart of the room, at the trashed mattress and the discarded shoe, at the epicenter of my grim excavation. My finger found the shutter button. It was a worn, red plastic circle. It was slick with the sweat from my palm. My finger trembled over it, a millimeter of movement separating ignorance from whatever terrible knowledge this machine was built to dispense. I squeezed my eyes shut. I pressed the button. Flash! A blinding blue-white light erupted, searing my vision through my closed eyelids. It was a silent explosion that bleached the world away for a single, infinite second. For a moment, there was nothing but the brilliant, painful afterimage burned onto my retinas. A mechanical whir broke the spell. A grinding, plastic sound. Then a soft click thunk. I opened my eyes. The room swam back into focus, darker now, my pupils struggling to adjust. A square of white plastic and cardboard was poking out from the slot on the front of the camera, like a strange, blank tongue. My throat was dry. Swallowing was a painful, deliberate act. With my free hand, the one that wasn't bleeding as much, I pulled the picture free. It was cool to the touch. The surface was a milky, featureless gray-white. I held it between my thumb and forefinger. My hand was shaking so badly, the blank square vibrated. I shook it, a frantic, desperate motion, an old habit I didn't know I had. I watched. My entire universe shrank to that 4-inch square. Slowly, like a ghost materializing from a fog, an image began to bloom from the center. A faint wash of chemical gray darkened into shapes. Lines and shadows bled into existence. My breath hitched in my chest. I was so nervous, I forgot to breathe. I saw the bed, the garish, ugly pattern on the comforter. I recognized it. My eyes darted from the photo to the real bed, then back. Yes, it was the same. I saw the peeling wallpaper behind it, the water stain shaped like a snarling face. It was the same. A sliver of sanity, a desperate hope, began to surface. It's just a picture. It's just a picture of an empty room. The image sharpened. The details grew clearer, more defined. The single high-heeled shoe lying on its side. The dark gash in the mattress where I had cut it open. This is impossible. It was a perfect record. A snapshot of this exact moment. But something was wrong. In the photograph, near the edge of the frame, was a dark shape on the floor. A shape that wasn't there when I looked up. I squinted, holding the picture closer to my face. The light in the room was dim, but the flash in the photograph had illuminated everything with brutal clarity. The shape was long. It was inconsistent. It wasn't a shadow. A chill, hard and sharp, traced its way down my spine. The shape resolved itself further. I could see fabric, folds of clothing, a pale curve that looked like an arm, and then a splash of color that made my stomach clench into a knot of ice. Blonde hair, splayed out on the filthy carpet like a discarded halo. It was a body, a person, a woman. On the floor, right there, in the space between the bed and the bathroom door. A space that was, right now, completely and utterly empty. My eyes shot up from the photo, scanning the real space. Nothing. Just the stained carpet. I looked back at the photo. She was there, face down, motionless. What is this? What is this all about? My head was spinning with questions. How can this be? Is this a trick? A camera that sees the past? A window into what happened here before I woke up? The chemical reaction continued its unholy work. The image clarified, the colors deepened, and something else emerged from the gloom. Standing over the body, a pair of legs, jeans, the same torn, dirty jeans I was wearing right now. My gaze traveled up the developing image, my heart pounding in my ears like a war drum. I saw the faded gray shirt. My shirt. I saw a pair of hands hanging loosely at the sides. One of them was dark, smeared with blood. My own hands began to shake so violently that the picture became a blur. I steadied it, forcing myself to look, forcing myself to see the final piece of the puzzle as it solidified out of the chemical ether. The face. It was my face. The same jawline, the same short, dark hair, the same man who had stared back at me from the mirror, a stranger, a ghost. But the expression, it wasn't the confused, terrified face I imagined I had now. It wasn't the blank slate from before. The man in the photograph was grinning. It was a wide, grotesque, horrifying grin. A slash of white teeth in a face contorted with something beyond joy, beyond victory. It was the face of pure, ecstatic madness. The eyes were wide, glittering in the flash, two black pits of sheer, unadulterated pleasure. He was looking down at the woman on the floor, at his work, and he was proud. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over me. I stumbled back, my legs hitting the edge of the small kitchenette counter. I held the picture out, my arm locked straight, as if to keep it away from me, to deny its proximity to my body. No, the word was a silent scream in my mind. No, that is not me. I looked at my own hands. The right one was raw and bloody from punching the mirror. The left one was grimy. They were my hands. I touched my face. My skin was clammy with cold sweat. My mouth was a tight, grim line of terror. There was no grin. There was no pleasure. I looked back at the photo. The grinning man stared back, unblinking, triumphant. In his world, the woman was still bleeding on the floor. In his world, he was God. The two realities crashed together in my head. The terrified man in the here and now, and the gleeful monster in the there and then. The victim and the perpetrator. The question that had been haunting me was no longer a question. I wasn't discovering a crime scene. I was revisiting it. This wasn't a map to find answers. It was a checklist, a souvenir tour of my own atrocity. The evidence was absolute, incorruptible, a chemical testament to a truth my mind had tried to burn away. The child's shirt, the lock of hair, the knife, Lena, and me. The architect, the butcher, the smiling demon.
A noise tore its way up from my lungs. It wasn't a word. It was a raw, guttural sound of an animal caught in a trap. A scream of pure psychic agony. It ripped through the stillness of the room, raw and shredded. No! With a surge of violent rage, a rage born of ultimate terror, I threw the Polaroid camera with all my might. It flew across the room and smashed against the far wall with a brittle plastic crack. It exploded into a dozen pieces, its internal mechanisms spilling out onto the floor like metallic guts. A single battery rolled under the bed. The destructive act did nothing. The silence rushed back in, deeper this time. The camera was broken. The machine was dead. But the picture was still in my hand. I looked down at it. My vision was blurry with tears of horror. The grinning man stared back at me. His joy was eternal. His crime was permanent, undeniable, unchanging. I was frozen, my back pressed against the counter, my legs refusing to hold me but unable to buckle. My breath was gone. My scream had taken all the air from my lungs, from the room itself. There was only the image, the proof. Me. I am the monster. My fingers clenched. The slick surface of the photograph buckled. I didn't think. An animal instinct took over my hands. I tore it. The rip was loud in the sudden stillness, a sharp, violent sound that cut through the thick air. The grinning man was torn in two. It wasn't enough. I folded the pieces and tore again, and again, and again. My fingers worked with a frantic, mindless energy, shredding the glossy paper into smaller and smaller pieces, as if dismembering the image could somehow kill the truth it held. The tiny squares and triangles of my monstrous face and Lena's broken body fluttered from my trembling hands, scattering across the stained carpet like toxic confetti. The act gave me no release. The image wasn't on the paper anymore. It was behind my eyes, burned into my memory with the permanence of a brand. The triumphant, ecstatic grin, the glittering, mad eyes, my grin. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the carpet. My lungs burned for air I couldn't seem to find. I needed to see my face. I needed to see it now. I needed proof. Proof that the monster in the chemical ghost story was a lie, a trick. The bathroom, the mirror. My legs moved, clumsy and uncoordinated. I lurched across the small room, my hand dragging against the gritty texture of the wall for balance. The world tilted and swam. The smell of bleach and old rot filled my nostrils, a cloying perfume of my own hidden work. I reached the bathroom doorway, my shoulder bumping hard against the frame. The mirror was a catastrophe. A spiderweb of violent cracks radiated from the point of impact where my fist had met the glass. 100 tiny fractured versions of the room stared back at me. But there was one large shard still clinging to the top of the frame, a jagged triangle of silvered glass about the size of my hand. It was enough. I leaned in, my breath fogging a small patch of the surface. I gripped the sides of the sink, my knuckles white. My heart was a frantic, hammering engine in my chest. I stared. The face in the shard was a ruin, eyes wide, pupils blown so large they nearly swallowed the irises, skin pale and clammy, stretched tight over the bones. My mouth was a thin, bloodless line, pulled back from my teeth in a grimace of pure horror. There were streaks of dirt on my cheek, a smear of blood near my temple. This was me. The terrified man, the victim. Relief, thin and watery, threatened to rise in my throat. See? It's not him. It's not the man in the photo. That was a lie. A distortion. Something is wrong with this place. With that camera. I kept staring, desperate to lock onto this image, this truth. My truth. And then it happened. It started at the mouth. As I watched my own horrified reflection, the lips in the glass began to move. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my own trembling. It was a slow, deliberate, independent motion.
The corners of the reflected mouth began to lift. A subtle, almost imperceptible twitch at first, then a clear, undeniable upward curve. The thin line of terror softened, widened. It was a smile. A slow, knowing, utterly malevolent smile that spread across the lips of the man in the glass. My breath hitched. A knot of ice formed in my gut. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed, transfixed by the impossible sight. The smile on the reflection grew wider, stretching the skin, pulling it back to reveal the mud. Teeth. They were my teeth. But the grin wasn't mine. It was his. The man from the photograph. Cold. Triumphant. Proud. His eyes changed next. My own frantic, terrified eyes stared back at me from my head. But in the shard of glass, the eyes of my reflection became cold and hard. The panic was gone, replaced by a glint of mocking amusement, of dark intelligence. It was like looking at a predator that knew it had finally cornered its prey. He was looking at me, not as a reflection, but through the glass, as if it were a window. "No," I whispered. The sound was a dry rasp in my own throat. My lips barely moved. The reflection's smile widened just a fraction more in response. It heard me. It did not speak. It just watched me. The smile remained fixed, a permanent scar on my own face, worn by another. My head was spinning. What is this? What is this all about? It's not real. It can't be real. A hallucination. The trauma. The blow to my head. My mind is broken. It has to be. But deep down, in a cold, dark place that was growing larger by the second, I knew it wasn't a hallucination. It was him. The other one. The one who drew the map. The one who wielded the knife. He was in there. Or maybe he was in here, and I was the ghost trapped in the reflection. A surge of pure, violent revulsion shot through me. I needed to break the connection. I needed to shatter that grinning face. I recoiled from the sink as if it were white hot. "No," I said again, louder this time, my voice cracking. My fist came up, an instinctive, desperate act of rebellion. I didn't aim for the mirror this time. I couldn't bear to touch him. I swung wildly, blindly, and my knuckles connected with the wall right beside the bathroom door frame. Thump. The sound was dull, fleshy. A shock of sharp, brilliant pain lanced up my arm from my knuckles. A flash of white behind my eyes. It was real. The pain was real. I cried out. A guttural sound of agony and rage, and pulled my hand back. It was already swelling. Fresh, bright red blood welled up from 4 split knuckles, dripping onto the peeling linoleum floor. The drops looked like dark red jewels on the grimy surface. I leaned against the opposite wall, panting, cradling my injured hand. The pain was a welcome distraction, a sharp, clean sensation in a world that had dissolved into madness. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force the image of the smiling reflection from my mind. Then, a new sound started. I froze. Every muscle in my body tensed. I held my breath, listening. Skitter-scrape. Pause. Skitter-scrape, scrape. My blood ran cold. The scratching, it was back. But something was wrong. My eyes shot open. The sound wasn't coming from under the bed. It wasn't across the room anymore. It was closer. Scrape. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was coming from inside the wall, the very wall my back was pressed against. I could feel the faintest vibration through the thin, cheap plasterboard. It was right there, inches from me. A frantic, desperate sound. Not the slow, methodical work of a rat. This was more urgent, more focused. like claws or fingernails scrabbling against wood, trying to dig a way out or in. A shiver of pure dread ran down my spine. I looked back towards the bathroom. My reflection in the shard of glass was still there. The smile was gone. Its face was now a mask of cold neutrality. But as I watched, its eyes, the cold, dead eyes of the monster, flickered. They moved from my face and darted for a split second towards the wall beside me, towards the source of the scratching. It was a flicker of annoyance, of irritation. He heard it too. My mind reeled. The connection was immediate, undeniable. The grinning man in the mirror and the sound in the wall. They were connected. The scratching wasn't some random horror of this cursed motel. It was part of his story, his plan, a loose end, something he had left unfinished. Was it Lena? Was she in the walls? The thought was so horrific I felt a wave of dizziness. No, I saw her body in the photo, on the floor. So, what? What is in the wall? My gaze dropped from the mirror to my hands. I was still cradling the one I had just slammed into the wall. The fresh blood was bright, almost lurid under the single bare bulb of the bathroom. It glistened as it dripped from my knuckles. It was the blood of the terrified man, of the me I thought I was. But as I stared at the crimson wounds, my focus shifted. I saw something else. Underneath the fresh red, deeply ingrained in the cuticles, caked under the ragged edges of my fingernails, were other stains. They weren't red. They were a dark, dirty brown, almost black in the dim light. Old, dried. Flakes of it were embedded in the creases of my skin, stains that wouldn't come from punching a wall 30 seconds ago, stains that a simple hand-washing would never remove. My breath caught in my throat. I brought my other hand up, the one that wasn't bleeding. It was the same. Filthy, grimy, but under the nails of that hand too, the same dark, ancient stains, the same crusted residue. My mind flashed back with sickening clarity. The balled-up child's t-shirt I had pulled from the mattress, the dark, ugly blotches on the cartoon animal, the knife from the toilet cistern, its blade rusted with the same dark color, the patches on the carpet that I had initially dismissed as wine or coffee. It was blood, all of it. Old blood, and it was on my hands. It was under my nails. It had been here the whole time. I hadn't acquired it in this room tonight. I had brought it with me. I had woken up with it. The evidence wasn't just in the room. It was part of me, written on my body. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck, drenching my collar. The air was so thick that breathing was difficult. The scratching in the wall continued, a steady, rhythmic, frantic pulse. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It sounded like a countdown. I looked from my stained, guilty hands to the wall, where the desperate sound originated, and then back to the shard of mirror. The reflection watched me. Its expression was blank, but its eyes knew. They knew that I knew. The game was over. The denial was shattered, just like the glass it was reflected in. The grinning man wasn't in the mirror. He wasn't in the photograph. He was in my skin. He was behind my eyes. And his hands were mine. My bloody hands, his bloody hands. The man in the mirror. The man in my skin. I backed away, shuffling sideways. My back remained pressed against the wall, the gritty wallpaper scraping against my shirt. The pain in my knuckles was a hot, throbbing anchor in a sea of unreality. It was the only thing that felt truly mine. A self-inflicted wound. A protest from the man I thought I was against, the monster I had become. The scratching sound intensified, a frantic, rhythmic clawing just inches from my ear. It felt like the plasterboard was breathing, vibrating with a life that was not its own. A life trapped and desperate. A shiver ran down my spine. My gaze locked onto the shard of mirror. The face within, My face was placid now. The mocking grin was gone, replaced by a cold, appraising stillness. He was watching me. He was watching me understand. His eyes, those hard, dead chips of glass, knew that the game was up. There was no more running from the truth, because the truth was running the show. It was wearing my clothes and bleeding my blood. The scratching stopped. The sudden absence of the sound was more jarring than its presence. The air in the room felt heavy, solid. My heart was pounding. I could hear the wet, thick beat of it in my own ears, a slow, terrified drum. My muscles were tensed, coiled, waiting for the next attack. My eyes, frantic, darted around the ruined room, searching for the source of the next horror. They moved past the smashed television, past the violated toilet, past the savaged mattress. They fell upon the floor. There, scattered near the foot of the bed, were the pieces, the tiny glossy squares and triangles of that chemical-scented lie, or that chemical-scented truth, the toxic confetti from my short-lived rebellion. And next to them, almost hidden in the gloom, was the napkin, the map, crumpled, spat upon, but still there. The flimsy architect's plan for my own damnation. A force that wasn't my own pulled me forward. My legs buckled. I fell to my knees, the impact jarring my bones, but I didn't feel it. I crawled. My hands, one swollen and bleeding, the other just caked in old filth, moved across the sticky carpet. It was a pilgrimage, an act of submission. I was crawling back to the altar. I reached the shredded remains of the Polaroid. My fingers brushed against a piece showing a corner of his grin. I recoiled, as if burned. My hand landed instead on the napkin. I picked it up. The paper was soft, fragile, damp from a condensation I couldn't place. My hands were shaking so badly it was a struggle to unfold it. My whole body shakes uncontrollably. Finally, it lay open on the carpet before me, a pathetic, hand-drawn diagram of this little box of hell. The blood from my knuckles smeared onto the paper, a fresh sacrifice on an old crime scene. I smoothed it out. The X's were drawn in a thick, confident black ink. I traced their path with a trembling finger, my mind replaying the night's discoveries. First X, behind TV, the single dirt-caked shoe, Lena's. Second X, cistern, the Ziploc bag, the lock of blonde hair, the rusted knife. Third X, mattress, the balled-up stained t-shirt, small enough for a child. A fresh wave of nausea washed over me. Use me, next to the drawing of the sink, the camera, the grinning man. I had followed his trail, his breadcrumbs of horror, and I had eaten every one. My eyes traveled to the last mark on the map. It was the biggest of all, a large, angry X drawn directly under the crude rectangle that represented the bed. But beside this X, there weren't words describing a hiding spot. There were no nouns. It wasn't a location, it was an instruction, an order, 2 words, written in stark, punishing capitals. Finish it. The air left my lungs in a rush. It wasn't a gasp, it wasn't a cry. It was just a silent, complete emptying. My head was spinning. The words pulsed on the napkin, glowing with a malevolent energy. Finish it. It wasn't a treasure map leading to the forgotten truth. It was a to-do list. It all crashed down on me then. A tidal wave of understanding so monstrous it threatened to drown what was left of my mind. The amnesia wasn't an accident. The blow to the head wasn't something that happened to me. It was something I did. To myself. What is this all about? The answer was simple, horrific, logical. He had done something terrible, unspeakable. Then methodically, he had created this map, a checklist, for hiding the evidence, for cleaning up his mess. And when every piece was hidden away, every trace of his sin tucked into the guts of this forgotten room, the final step was to erase the biggest piece of evidence of all, his own memory. He had turned himself into the victim, a blank slate, a man who could wake up and follow a map to his own crimes with a sense of innocent discovery, a sick, elaborate performance for an audience of one. I did this. All of it. I wrote the map. I hid the shoe. I stashed the knife. I took the photo. And then I broke my own mind to forget, to escape. The man I was, this terrified, confused wreck crawling on the floor. I was the escape plan. I was the alibi. Oh God, I whispered. My throat was dry. The words were just sand and air. I stayed there on my knees for a long time, the world tilting around me. The only constants were the throbbing pain in my hand and the two words burning a hole in my brain. Finish it. It meant there was one thing left. One final step on his checklist that I, the blank slate, was supposed to complete. Something he couldn't do before wiping the slate clean. Something that had to be done by the innocent man. Scrape, scrape, scrape. My head snapped up. The sound was back, but it wasn't coming from the wall anymore. My eyes darted to the bed. It was coming from underneath, from the place marked with the final X. I started crawling again, moving toward the bed. Every inch was a monumental effort. My body screamed in protest. Every instinct told me to run, to smash the window, to scream until my lungs tore, but my hands and knees kept moving, dragging me toward the final task. He was in control now, the other one, the grinning man. I was just the vehicle, the hands and feet carrying out his last will and testament. As I drew closer, the sound changed again. The frantic, light scratching was gone. It was replaced by something else, something heavier. Thump, silence, thump. My heart synced with the sound. It had weight. It had purpose. This wasn't a rat. This wasn't an animal caught in the walls. This was a dull, rhythmic, heavy impact. The sound of a fist against wood, or a head. It was the sound of something trapped, something alive. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I reached the side of the bed. The cheap polyester bed skirt hung down to the floor, a grimy curtain hiding the darkness beneath. The thumping was louder here, vibrating up through the floorboards into my knees. I had to look. I had to finish it. My hand trembled as I reached out. The bloody knuckles brushed against the fabric. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of dust, mildew, and something else. Something coppery and sweet. I swallowed hard. Reflexively, I took hold of the hem of the bed skirt. I lifted it. The darkness under the bed was absolute. Motes of dust danced in the single beam of light from the main room that cut through the gloom. My eyes took a moment to adjust. I saw dust bunnies the size of small animals, a crushed cigarette butt, a single forgotten penny, and something else. Right in the center, where the thumping was originating. It wasn't a loose floorboard. It wasn't a bag or a box. Bolted directly into the pale, grimy wood of the floor was a square of dark metal. It was a hatch. Small, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet. It was made of thick, rusted iron, with a heavy, sliding bolt lock securing it shut. It looked ancient, like something you'd find on a submarine or in a bunker. It didn't belong here. Thump! The sound was right there. The entire metal hatch jumped with the force of the impact from below. It was coming from inside. What is this? What is in there? My mind reeled. Was this where Lena was? No, the photo showed her on the floor. So, what? Who? What had he done? What had he trapped down there? Was finish it an order to silence whoever was making that sound? My sanity was a frayed thread, about to snap. I stared at the hatch, mesmerized by the horror of it. The source of the thumping knew I was here. It grew more frantic. Thump, 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 thump. It was a desperate, panicked rhythm. An appeal, a plea, or a warning. I didn't know what to do. My mind was a vortex of terror and confusion. But his orders were clear. Finish it. With a sense of terrible preordained finality, I leaned further under the bed. The smell of rot and damp earth was stronger here. I extended my shaking hand, the one that wasn't bleeding. I reached through the dusty darkness. My fingertips brushed against the cold, rough surface of the iron bolt. It was heavy, solid. I could feel the vibrations of the pounding from below traveling up the metal into my skin, a frantic SOS from hell. I wrapped my fingers around it. The rusted iron was cold, gritty. It didn't want to move. It was sealed tight. I took a firmer grip, my knuckles white, my whole body trembling with a mixture of dread and grim purpose. It was the last step, the final secret. I was about to open the cage he had built. I was about to finish it. My fingers were on the bolt. The thumping from below was a live thing, a furious heart beating against my hand. Thump, thump, thump. Each impact was a jolt, a separate shock that traveled from the cold iron up my arm and into my teeth. I could feel the vibrations in my bones, a desperate rhythm transmitted directly into my soul. The air under the bed was stale, thick with the smell of damp earth and something sickly sweet, the odor of old secrets. The words burned behind my eyes. Finish it. What did that mean? What final, monstrous act was left to perform? Was I meant to slide this heavy bolt open, to release whatever was trapped in the darkness below? The thumping was frantic, a panicked, desperate plea, a sound of life. Was I supposed to silence it? Was that the task he had left for me, the amnesiac Patsy? A final, cold-blooded execution to be carried out by a man who wouldn't even remember it? What is this all about? The thought sent a new wave of nausea through me. I was a puppet, my strings being pulled by a monster who wore my face. My hand, the one wrapped around the bolt, was not my own. It was his. I pulled. The bolt resisted. Rusted metal screamed against rusted metal. It was stuck fast. A seal that had not been broken in a long time. The thumping from within the hatch intensified, becoming a wild, furious pounding. It knew. Whatever was down there, it knew I was trying to get in. It sounded like it was throwing its entire body against the underside of the hatch. A frenzy of either hope or terror. I couldn't tell which. My muscles tensed up. I set my feet, anchoring myself against the bed frame, and pulled again, my whole body straining with the effort. It gave. A quarter of an inch. A loud, grating groan echoed in the small space under the bed. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I was doing it. I was finishing it. I was about to look into the face of his final secret. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I took a breath to pull one last time. Wee. The sound was alien. It didn't belong to the room. It was a high, piercing scream that tore through the night and ripped the fragile quiet of my personal hell to shreds. It grew louder, closer, resolving into a familiar, terrifying pattern. A siren. Not one, maybe two. It ended in a strangled yelp as tires screeched on asphalt, right outside. My blood froze solid in my veins. Then the room exploded in color. Red, blue, red, blue. The flashing lights pulsed through the filthy, curtainless window, a silent, rhythmic scream. They painted the room in strobing colors of panic. The nicotine-stained walls flashed a bloody crimson, then a cold, deathly cobalt. The shattered remains of the mirror on the floor glittered like broken teeth, catching the lights and scattering them across the ceiling. The dark stains on the carpet, the ones I knew were his work, pulsed from black to deep purple with every flash. The entire room was a crime scene, and now it was lit up like one. My hand dropped from the bolt. Reflexively, I scrambled backward, crab walking out from under the bed, every muscle screaming. My back pressed against the wall, the rough texture of the wallpaper digging into my shirt. My eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on the door. Bang! 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 The sound was like a physical blow against my chest. Heavy, powerful fists hammered against the flimsy wood of the door. The entire frame shook. The small brass chain rattled in its track. "Cole Anders!" A voice. Loud, booming, amplified by a megaphone, crackling with static and authority. It was a sound that expected to be obeyed. They knew my name. My real name. The one from the wallet. How could this be? My head was spinning with questions. Had he called them? Was this part of his plan? To get caught, but only after erasing the mastermind. "This is the police! We have the motel surrounded! Open the door now!" I was trapped. The word was a perfect crystalline shard of ice in my mind. There was no escape. To my right, a door being battered by the law. Beneath the bed, a bolted hatch with something alive and furious inside it. The room wasn't a hiding place anymore. It was a cage, and two different monsters were trying to get in. The thumping from the hatch started again, but it had changed. It was no longer a plea. It was a wild, violent rage. Thump, 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 thump. It was competing with the fists on the door, a desperate, animalistic percussion trying to be heard over the shouts of men. The person, the thing, under the floor was panicking, sensing the new arrivals, sensing the trap closing shut from above. Bang, bang, bang. "Anders, we know you're in there. Don't make this harder than it has to be." My throat was dry. I couldn't have made a sound if I wanted to. I pushed myself further into the corner, making myself small. My eyes darted between the violently shaking door and the bed skirt that hid the frantic secret in the floor. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild bird trying to break free. Who was the real threat? The men with the badges and the megaphones, who believed I was a criminal? Or the thing under the floor, the reason for all of this? The final piece of the puzzle he'd left for me to finish. So, who? The police? Or the prisoner? The flashing lights were relentless, disorienting. Red, blue. My shadow danced on the wall behind me, a grotesque, jerking puppet. I saw the glint of my own eyes in a shard of the broken mirror. They were wide with a terror that was pure and absolute. There was no trace of the grinning man. He was gone. He had done his work, set the stage, and left me, the shivering newborn, to face the consequences. A shiver ran down my spine. The cacophony was building. The wail of the sirens, the relentless pounding on the door, the booming, amplified voice shouting my name, the frantic subterranean thumping from the hatch. It was a symphony of chaos, an orchestra of damnation, and I was the conductor, the audience, and the sacrifice. My mind felt like it was tearing apart, shredded by the onslaught of noise and light. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it did nothing. The sounds were inside my skull. What do I do? What the hell is going on? I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to find a black space, a moment of reprieve, but all I saw were the flashes of red and blue against my eyelids. I saw the Polaroid picture, the grinning man, the lock of blonde hair, the child's t-shirt. It all swirled together in a vortex of horror. And then another sound, a new one. It was impossible. It was the most insane, illogical thing that could have happened in that moment. It was a sound so out of place, so fundamentally wrong, that my mind refused to process it for a second. It was the phone. Brrrring, brrrring. the shrill, piercing cry of the old rotary phone on the nightstand. It cut through the sirens, through the banging, through the thumping. It was a sharp, needle-like sound that went straight through my eardrums and into the center of my brain. The fists on the door paused. The shouting stopped. Even the sirens seemed to dip for a heartbeat. In that sliver of a second, two sounds remained, locked in a duel. The desperate pounding from under the floor and the insistent, shrieking ring of the telephone. Brrrring. My eyes snapped open. I stared at the phone. The ugly beige plastic thing sat there, vibrating with each ring, as if it, too, were alive. This is impossible. Who was calling me? Who could possibly be calling this room at this exact moment? The whisperer? Was this one final taunt, one last move in his sick game? Brrrring. It was a summons. It was an order. My whole body was shaking uncontrollably. The choice was supposed to be between the door and the hatch, a simple, horrifying binary. Now there was a third point, a third demand for my attention. The pounding on the door began again, louder this time, more furious, as if angered by the interruption. "Anders, open this door, now!" The thumping from the hatch grew even more frantic, a wild, desperate drumming that vibrated through the whole room. Brrrring. The phone kept ringing, a relentless, patient shriek. My mind went blank. The questions ceased. The fear was too large, too total. I was a statue in a storm of noise and light, my eyes fixed on the ringing phone. The door, the hatch, the phone. 3 points of a triangle with me, paralyzed in the middle. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I couldn't even breathe. I was simply there, trapped at the intersection of 3 colliding nightmares. The pounding on the door, the thumping from the floor, a screaming phone. I felt as if an invisible hand were squeezing my heart, trying to crush it in my ribcage. The strobing red and blue lights turned the room into a churning vortex of panic, and I was frozen at its center, a statue in a flashing, screaming nightmare. The sounds were not separate things. They had merged into one deafening wave of noise that washed over me, threatening to drag me under. The fists on the door were a violent thunder. The thumping from the hatch was a subterranean pulse of pure biology. And the phone. The phone was a high, piercing shriek that drilled directly into my sanity. Brrrring. It was a demand. It was a command. Against all logic, against the tidal wave of noise and fear, that one sound held a unique authority. It was a targeted strike. My muscles screamed in protest. My mind was a blank sheet of overexposed film. Instinct took over, not thought. There was no room left for thought. It was a purely animal reaction, a twitch of a nerve. Before I even knew I was moving, I lunged, a desperate, clumsy scramble across the filthy floor. My hand shot out and snatched the beige receiver from its cradle, slamming it against the side of my head. My ear throbbed from the impact. I pressed the cold plastic hard against my skin, trying to block out the world. Silence, on the line, for a single, terrifying second. Then a breath, a sharp, ragged gasp for air, and a voice. The distortion was gone. It was a woman. Her voice was crystal clear, but thin and stretched taut with terror. It was breathless, wet with tears, and so close it felt like she was whispering directly into my ear canal. "Cole." Goosebumps erupted over every inch of my skin. A cold wave washed down my spine. She knew my name, but her voice. It wasn't the grating electronic whisper of the game master. It was human. It was terrified. "Cole, don't let them in. It's a trap." The world tilted. The words didn't compute. A trap. I was already in a trap. This room was the trap. The men outside were the law, the cavalry, The ones who were supposed to end this, weren't they? My throat was dry. I tried to speak, to ask, but only a choked croak came out. Crack! A new sound from the door. Not a wood. Fist. Something harder. The wood splintered. The noise was so loud it vibrated through the receiver into my ear. Anders, last chance! We're coming in! The megaphone voice boomed, raw and angry now. The woman on the phone sobbed, a sharp, panicked sound. No, 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 please, Cole. It's not the police. They'll kill us both. You have to listen to me. You have to trust me. My eyes shot from the rattling, splintering door to the frantic, shuddering hatch under the bed. The thumping from below had become a single, continuous, violent frenzy. It was her. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The thumping, the sound of life. The thing under the floor was the woman on the phone. Please, she begged, her voice breaking. You locked me in here to keep me safe. You promised. You promised you'd come back for me. Open the hatch. You have to let me out. You have to let me out now. What the hell is going on? My head was spinning with questions, a dizzying storm of them. I locked her in to keep her safe. From whom? From the men outside? The grinning man in the Polaroid picture flashed in my mind's eye. Was he protecting her, or was he the one she needed protection from? My own face twisted in a manic leer standing over a body. Was that her? Was the photograph a lie? Or was this phone call the lie? Anders! The man at the door screamed my name. His voice was raw metal. Cole! The woman on the phone screamed my name. Her voice was a shard of glass. The thumping under the floor was a desperate heartbeat. The heartbeat of the whole rotten motel, pounding, pounding, pounding. A trap. Who was trapping whom? The men outside, with their flashing lights and battering rams, claiming to be police. The woman below, trapped in the dark earth, her voice frantic, pleading, or the grinning man I saw in the mirror, the architect of this entire nightmare, the one who drew the map, the one who wrote "finish it." What was I supposed to finish? Releasing her? Or something else? Crash! The door buckled inward. A long vertical crack appeared near the lock. Sawdust and flakes of paint puffed into the air, dancing like insects in the flashing red and blue lights. The chain strained, the metal screws groaning as they were pulled from the wood. It wouldn't hold for much longer, maybe seconds. "They're coming!" the woman shrieked into the phone. "The bolt, Cole! You have to slide the bolt! Please, I don't want to die in here!" My body moved on its own. I dropped the receiver. It swung from its cord, bumping against the leg of the nightstand. Her tiny, tinny voice continued to plead from the dangling plastic. A ghost in the machine. I wasn't listening anymore. I was on my hands and knees, crawling toward the bed, toward the thumping. My back pressed against the wall was a memory from a lifetime ago. I was in the open now, in the very center of the storm. The strobing lights painted my crawling form in alternating shades of blood and ice. My shadow leaped across the walls, a monstrous, sprawling thing. I reached the bed. I didn't hesitate. I plunged my arm under the dusty skirt into the stale, earthy darkness. My fingers found the bolt. It was cold iron, heavy, real. The thumping was directly beneath my palm now, a frantic, living pulse against the metal. It was a bird trapped in a box, beating its wings to pulp. I looked back at the door. Another splinter of wood flew off as something slammed against it again. I could see a sliver of the dark hallway through the crack. They were almost through. My eyes darted back to my hand on the bolt. This was the choice. The final X on the map. The final command. The men outside were a known quantity of violence. They had a goal. Get to me. But her, the woman in the dark, she was the heart of the mystery, the reason for the knives, the hair, the bloodstains, the Polaroid. She was the story. Releasing her meant facing that story. It meant finding out if I was a savior or a killer. My muscles tensed. The air was so thick that breathing was difficult. My heart was pounding, a deafening drum in my own ears, a counter-rhythm to the chaos outside and below. A trap. She said I locked her in to keep her safe. That I promised. Was that possible? Could there have been a moment of clarity for the other me? A moment where he tried to save someone from a fate he had orchestrated? Or was this the final, cruelest part of his game? To make me believe I was a hero, only to unleash the real monster from her cage? The bolt was stiff. I remembered pulling it before, the screech of rusted metal. I braced my feet against the floor, gritting my teeth. My fingers, slick with sweat, gripped the cold iron handle. The door groaned, a final, agonized sound of surrender. The chain snapped. The door flew open, slamming against the interior wall with a deafening bang that shook the entire room. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of splintered wood settling. Then, heavy footsteps. 2 men. Big. They filled the doorway, their forms silhouetted against the flashing chaos outside. They weren't wearing police uniforms, they were dressed in dark, heavy work clothes. The man in front held a crowbar. It rested on his shoulder, its curved end stained with flecks of my door's paint. His face was a mask of grim determination in the pulsing light. He wasn't here to make an arrest. The man from the megaphone was behind him. He lowered a small black speaker. His eyes, cold and flat, scanned the room. They found me on the floor. A slow smile spread across his face. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator that has finally cornered its prey. "There you are, Anders," he said, his voice no longer amplified but a low, conversational growl. "Thought you could hide from us? The boss is very unhappy. He wants his property back." My blood ran cold. The woman's voice from the dangling receiver echoed in my head. "It's not the police!" My eyes shot from the man's cruel smile, past his partner with the crowbar, to my own trembling hand on the bolt of the hatch. The thumping below had stopped. She was holding her breath, listening, waiting. The man took a step into the room. "Now, are you going to give her back to us? Or do we have to take her, and take you apart in the process?" I was on my knees, caught in the dead center of the room. The door was a gaping wound. The men were advancing. The bolt on the hatch was inches from my trembling hand, inches from her, inches from the truth. My own ragged breath was the only sound I could truly hear inside my own head, a thin, whistling noise. My eyes darted between the 2 impossible choices: the advancing, brutal figures in the doorway, and the cold iron bolt that separated me from the secret in the floor. My face was a mask of primal terror as the world, lit in strobing red and blue, closed in.